I'm very honored to be here for the 5th anniversary of OUVEMA, and it's very interesting work, and I was really interested by the talk we just heard about the history. And it's about writing further history, because as he highlighted, changing behavior is difficult. Now, as mentioned, this project was a large project. 9 colleagues and their PhD students collaborated here, funded by the department and a couple of other sources as well. So it wasn't as long as OUVEMA, doesn't have the long-term perspective because the project ended. And in this particular talk, I draw in particular on the work of 3 students in the project. Now, why did we do this? I think the first thing we have to realize that transport policy is in a dilemma. And why is it in a dilemma? It is in a dilemma because it worked so brilliantly. This is the map of Switzerland in 1950. If you rescale it so that the distances don't read in kilometers, but in hours traveled. And for the locals, you can easily spot that the Jura is further away than it should, and that the Engadine is further away than it should. So it's distorted because the speeds on the road system were unequal across the country. Now, this was 1950, before the country started to build motorways and before it started to invest heavily in heavy and too heavy cars, as they do today. Now, what happened? This is 1950, and this is 2000. It's the same scale. So what did we do? Essentially, the country shrunk itself by a factor of 2. And this was obviously a great thing, because this delivered all the things which theory and practice expects. You got higher accessibilities. With higher accessibilities, you get higher productivity. And with higher accessibility, you get higher social capital, or the social capital doesn't dissolve as quickly. Now, the problem is that a couple of other things happened which weren't as desired. One thing which happened on the impact side is that we traveled more, because as we made the environment faster, we also made it, in generalized cost terms, cheaper, because things were closer, things were more reliable, things were safer. And we responded like every consumption good, we consumed more of it. We will see what the microcensus of this year will show, but I would expect that we are returning to the trend line of before COVID. So we traveled more, as we expected. Now, and this already tells us what the dilemma is. We produce higher accessibility by building more infrastructure, either on the rail side or on the road side. This improves productivity, economic productivity, and this has been demonstrated any number of times in very well done, high-quality econometric studies. And as I've claimed, we improve social capital because we can maintain friendships and contacts much easier than before. Now, this is a good thing, and this is what policy and the population wants. On the other hand, the externalities of that process have become so prominent that we have to do something. And what are the externalities? The first thing is greater accessibility increases car ownership. And the moment you have a car in the household, in the garden, you will use it. And actually at quite length. The average kilometers traveled is 15,000 kilometers a year. So car ownership is increased. We increase transport demand, as just shown. And as long as we are driving combustion engine cars, this brings greenhouse gas emissions, which is now a hard constraint. And because we can't build a road as quickly as we increase our driving, it increases congestion. So it creates a spiral of reinforcing signals. It also encourages working from home, which you might say is a good thing, but if you're a public transport undertaking, you would say that's a bad thing, because people who work from home don't buy season tickets anymore. And without a season ticket, they aren't committed to public transport anymore. And finally, it invites sprawl. Now, in Switzerland, we have committed ourselves against all of these externalities. We have reduced the amount of land available for sprawl. We have committed ourselves against greenhouse gas emissions. So what happens? What happens is what you see at the moment, that the Swiss population votes down further motorways, but still has a lot of money in a fund to build roads. And this is the conflict which is currently played out in Bern, and probably with another referendum next year, I would guess, or a year and a half ago from now. Now, why are we still so committed to building further roads? Why are we still committed to expanding the system? And I think it's important that we realize that we are acting on certain images we have of the environment and how it should be. And these particular visions, particularly on the urban side, come from architect suggestions about 100 years ago. The Swiss architect, this French architect, Le Corbusier, had a bit of a low period in his office, so he decided to think ahead, and he came up with his idea of cité radieuse to solve the problem of Paris. He didn't like urban streets, he didn't like cities, so he came up with this idea of putting people up into towers, obviously modern ones, in the park. And because he liked cars and he liked airplanes, he put a little airport in between them and a 12-lane motorway below. And that's an image which was built, obviously at cut-down versions of it, all around the world since the 1950s. If you go today to China or to Singapore, this is what you see being built. So this image is still very powerful, and it's also powerful in some of the discussion in Europe and in Switzerland. The other, even more important vision was of another underemployed architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, an American architect of great esteem, who suggested that the solution is Ozonia, giving every household a quarter acre, 1,000 square meters, a house, a car, and a parking lot, and then connecting all these suburban homes with roads. And this is what you would get if you would ask the population what they want. A majority of people will tell you that's what we want. And now, obviously, all those roads create problems for us. But we still think, the politicians and their voters, that the reality will look like that. They assume that building roads will result in nirvana, i.e., all motorways will be sunlit, empty, and well-maintained. Now, when you think about it, you know that that won't be the case. But this is the image we have at the back of their mind when our Bundesrat certainly says we want to build more roads, more motorways. So what to do? What can we do? Now, it's not as if the architects and planners and engineers and economists aren't thinking about the alternatives. What can we do today? And there are two things which are currently in particular pushed forward. One is, let's price everything, because we are clearly overusing the existing infrastructure. We now see that just building more of it will not solve the problem, so let's price it or ration it. If you were to talk to an economist or a transport planner, he or she will tell you this is the pricing mechanisms we need. We need a price for you just to have a car, because you want to have a system available. Then you pay as you go per kilometer to pay for the damage you do to the infrastructure. Then we make sure that you don't travel in the peak periods, congestion pricing. We shift your way out of that. We make sure that you always find a parking space by pricing parking so that there's always a parking space available. We price the greenhouse gases you emit or generate, and finally, we charge you for everything else you annoy your neighbors with, noise, etc. And there's various versions of the same idea which don't work with money, but essentially are the same thing. The problem is that this is next to impossible to get agreed in a democratic society. When you look at the cases where road pricing was agreed, it was generally, the population was either desperate, like in Manhattan, or they didn't have a say, like in Singapore, or they tricked the system by essentially letting only those vote who benefit, and those who didn't benefit weren't allowed to vote. Stockholm. So it's a hard thing to suggest. And for that reason, all Swiss attempts of getting road pricing on the policy calendar have failed. And the Astra, one has to admit, has tried it twice. And it was diluted and said no to twice already. So maybe not. Then the other thing is, oh, let's put everybody in public transport and make sure that public transport works perfectly. I'm all in favor of this, but it just doesn't have enough leverage. Why doesn't it have enough leverage? Because public transport, by its very system, is more expensive in generalized cost term than travel by car. Because in public transport, you have to go to the stop, you're never sure whether the bus arrives, you have to sit in the bus while people get on and off and delay you, and then finally you arrive somewhere which you still have to walk to the final stop. And these elements add cost, and you, and generally everybody, values those elements higher than the vehicle driving time. So traveling by public transport is just not competitive for 100% market share. You can get a 30% market share, and maybe in situations like Central Geneva or Central Zurich, you get an 80% market share. But beyond that, it's just next to impossible. And remember, I guess, I know in Zurich, it helps that there aren't enough parking spaces for everybody who wants to go. I don't know about Geneva, but certainly in Zurich, that's the case. So, yes, we can achieve certain things with this, but will this be enough? So, one great hope now is obviously we'll put everybody into small vehicles which are autonomous and are electric. Great idea, and I'm all in favor, but we have a downside to this. And the downside to this is that it will not be enough. These were back-of-the-envelope calculations of Lucas Ballo and Clarissa Livingston, checking what we can achieve. This is very rough, and the exact numbers will be different. But what is the key mechanisms you have? You have today's cars. You switch them off to today's e-cars, and you reduce the CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Great. If you assume that the electric cars of 2050 will be technologically improved, i.e., in particular, the batteries will not be as greenhouse gas emitting in their production as they are today, you would get there. The red is the target which Switzerland has set itself. The problem is only, and in Switzerland that's obvious, we have population growth, which we are banking on to maintain the pensions, which we generously increased already without having the people to pay for them. But anyway, we have these population increase. Then electric vehicles will be cheaper than today's vehicles per kilometer traveled. And if you then add the impact of the higher quality of travel in the autonomous vehicles, you get induced demand effects. People will travel more kilometers, will travel more, make more trips. And when you add this together, you are well above the target. And every planner, every economist will tell you that this will be the case. So Switzerland as a policy And the population with it will have to think about something else because current policies will not cut it. Certainly not on the transport side. So what to do? There are many planners to thinking about car-free or car-reduced cities. And the most prominent of these ideas is obviously the 15-minute city, which has been put forward in Paris in particular and elsewhere. I don't want to discuss whether this is actually a new idea, whether it's going to work, but I think Paris makes it a very, very particular vision, because for all of us who have been there, have Paris as a city of high densities, very high quality of public services, very high quality of the other amenities of the city. And it's such an attractive city that it's actually one of the most visited one in the world in terms of tourism. And they also raise the question, can we ever convert Lausanne into Paris? Probably not. Although Lausanne is a very rich place, but think of a smaller, equivalently large German or Norwegian city. Will that ever be Paris? No, it will not. So the question is whether the 15-minute city would ever be as attractive as the Paris example. So what else can we do? And this is where this e-bike city project came in. We said we need to develop alternative ideas which provide a vision for both the public as well as for policymakers in which direction one could go. And with this idea, I'll explain in a minute, we also wanted to test if it could work. So what was the idea? The idea was to say that we have to shift policymakers and the public away from the idea that the car is the first, foremost, and most important mode in the city, picking up on the ideas which my previous speaker also alluded to. So we have to shift away from the car as being the core mode. And to do that, we said, let's give 50% of the existing road space to human-powered vehicles. And this number was pulled out of thin air. We said, let's start with that. And then it was obvious to us it will not be an e-bike city, it will be an e-bike, public transport, walking city. But e-bike city focuses the attention on what is new. And finally, we wanted to see if we can maintain the existing accessibility levels, which are essential for today's wealth and well-being. Okay, so we did that. So the PhD students and the team as a whole developed tools to redesign the network. So because if you take away 50% of the road space, you get loads and loads of one-way streets. You want to do these in a way which doesn't unnecessarily increase the detours of the car drivers. We want to make sure that everybody still gets to their address with the motorized vehicles, because you have service vehicles and the police who need to get to the address with the car or the motorized vehicles. So we did that, and then we looked at the detailed designs for the junctions and for the roads, and then we talked and asked architects to make pictures of it. And this is how it might look like. This is a road in Zurich, and as you can see, the bicyclist is traveling on this two-way bike lane, and on his right side there's a tram stop, and on the part behind you have the cars or the vehicles beyond that. And we did this for a couple of places to be able to talk with the public about what this would look like. And to make it even nicer, we made a little video, and I will show that little video now.
Climate change may be the greatest challenge of the 21st century. In Switzerland, transportation produces 41% of CO2 emissions from energy combustion, which is more than in the USA and across the European Union. Traffic jams are commonplace, and by 2050, populations in Swiss cities should grow by another 30%. Traffic simulations by researchers at ETH Zurich show that there is a solution to increase the capacity of streets and reduce emissions. Reallocating more street space for sustainable modes can improve safety, efficiency, access, and sustainability in a way that everyone's mobility needs are met. Decarbonizing transportation while improving the freedom of travel requires integration of micromobility and public transportation. By transforming streets, we can strengthen public transportation and micromobility and provide safer and more attractive spaces for pedestrians. Emergency and delivery vehicles, as well as mobility vans and tradespeople, will have access to all buildings through a parking reservation system. Better access to wider, separated bike lanes will increase safety and convenience for all ages and abilities. Children could enjoy cycling to school safely. Increased bike parking and more publicly shared micromobility would provide last-mile connections for commuters and visitors. More space designated for micromobility means people would benefit from less crashes, reduced stress, and improved health and well-being. Based on research, redesigning streets is a quick and cost-effective solution that would work if implemented. People can regain autonomy and enjoy the freedom of movement without owning a car. By combining public transport and micromobility, we occupy less street space and make the city more livable for everyone while achieving emissions goals for transportation.
Good. Okay, so that's the vision. Now, we are engineers, so we want to see, can this work? And using the tool, which was already alluded to in the video, we set up a model for Zurich and the environment. So we used Matsim, which is the agent-based tool, which my group and a group in Berlin have developed. This tool is available open source as much as it goes. What we did, we modeled the city of Zurich, the black, plus the parameters around it to make sure that all the movements in the system can be actually properly modeled. We calculated how much extra kilometers people would need to travel after the implementation of the e-bike city. And then one of the students, as part of his PhD, did a very detailed stated preference survey to find out how people might respond to such a world. That's obviously a big if they would then do as they told us, if it really happens. But these types of studies have shown to be pretty reliable overall. Now, when you do this to a model of Zurich with the population of Zurich modeled as individual agents, you get changes, and with that new mode choice model. And you can see that in this case, yes, the car travelers do respond. And they do respond because the infrastructure has been changed. There's just things they have to adapt to. And it's not inequitable because everybody will be affected the same way, so you can buy your way out of the solution. So car driving will go down in terms of the numbers of trips. Public transport will gain a lot. And finally, walking and cycling will increase. Now, in terms of kilometers, it's not quite as dramatic, but it's dramatic enough that the e-bike city makes a very considerable contribution to the necessary greenhouse gas emission reductions. And if we then properly do a cost-benefit analysis using both the existing Swiss norms as well as an improved and actually theoretically superior approach, we can see that this would pay, because the health impacts of such a city are so enormous that the health gains alone make it worthwhile. And this will be an even more important issue as we get older, because Switzerland, on average, will probably be 10 years older at that in 2050 than it is today. And there, the health becomes even more important. Now, the question is, would such a plan be ready for a referendum? Because as you know, all of these changes would need to be voted upon. We did surveys about this, drawing on a panel which we have available. And we saw that in the city of Zurich, we get about 45% for, 45% against, and 10% don't know yet. So it doesn't seem as if it's an impossible question. It's not clear yet, but it's within reach. So we'll find out if any city is willing enough to run a referendum and prepare it properly. And with that, I'm looking forward to all of your questions. Many of them can be answered by the material we have on the website, but I'm looking forward to your questions now.